This is where there's a tension between how we pursue the same goals. Like as we've just established, we have many of the same goals. But insofar as you make religion look palatable, insofar as you suggest to your audience that they can have their religious cake and eat it too. They can have their reason, they can have their respect for science, they can have a 21st century worldview, but they can also hold on to everything they love in Christianity or fear to lose. And it's undoubtedly mostly Christianity, but whatever, any religion. My concern is that it keeps us shackled to these Iron Age philosophies and these Iron Age conversations where we should be having a 21st century conversation about everything, ethics included.
Okay, so... Okay, but I want to ask you a little bit about your feeling about...
Wait, before you move on, I want to get each of you to clarify something so that we know where we are. So Sam, you said the problem here is that the dogma can't be updated, right? That slavery is with us permanently because it's written into the dogma. But clearly, most of the traditions in which it's written into the Holy Book don't practice slavery, and the people who adhere to these belief systems wouldn't defend slavery. So clearly there is the capacity for an update mechanism.
Well, no, but not really. I mean, they've been forced, they've had it beaten out of them, right? I mean, we fought a civil war in the U.S. to get rid of slavery.
But it was Christians who abolished slavery in England, though.
What was that?
It was Christians who were at the forefront of the movement to abolish slavery in England.
But there are Christians on either side of everything. I mean, there's no one else to do the job.
Right, but that's the update mechanism.
Wait a second. But it was specifically Christians who were using their Christian belief as a justification for eradicating slavery.
The problem was they were actually on the losing side of a theological argument. And it would be much better, I think you would agree, if one of the 10 commandments had been, don't keep slaves. I mean, there's certainly one we could swap out for that one. And so that way, it would have been much easier for Christians to have fought against slavery. And it's much harder for Muslims, frankly, to fight against it now. The problem is that there's a point I made, I think, in my first book, is that the doors leading out of this kind of fundamentalism don't open from the inside. They get bashed open from the outside. And it's humanism and it's secularism and it's scientific rationality that has exerted such pressure, such winnowing pressure on Christianity, now for multiple centuries, that's why we're not encountering the Christians of the 14th century on a daily basis. We are essentially encountering Muslims of the 14th century, not only in the Middle East, but in our own societies, in terms of their intuitions about how we should all live, right? I mean, the fact that 0% of UK Muslims think homosexuality is acceptable, right? 0%. I mean, there's almost no question you can come up with where we could poll this society and say, do you think that a lizard king is living in the Oval Office? You never get a 0% response to any poll question, right? But if you ask Muslims on the streets of London, is homosexuality morally acceptable? Apparently, you can find no one who says it is. That's shocking, and it's not an accident, right? And it would be much easier if the book actually said, you can love anyone you want, and it's not a problem.
It is shocking, but I think there's a reason that you keep finding yourself at Islam, which may be the slowest to update for reasons that may be ancient. But I want to.
Well, that is a useful.
I can do it for Christianity. I want to make the point as cleanly and as undistractedly as possible. But yeah, it's true. I have the same kinds of concerns about Christianity or Mormonism or Scientology or anything else. And the point is they're all different. And there's no reason to be, because Islam, to take the case where it's fine, Islam doesn't represent any impediment to stem cell research, right? Because they just don't think that the fertilized ovum is immediately ensouled. It waits 40 days or 80 days or 120 days, depending on what hadith you believe. So It's just that never came up when we were all complaining about how religion, in this case Orthodox Judaism and Christianity in the States, was posing an impediment to embryonic stem cell research.
Okay, hold on. I wanted to ask you a clarifying question too.
Yeah, sure.
Same level. Would you agree that there are things written into these religious texts that are unambiguously unacceptable viewed through a modern lens, and not because the texts are so complicated that we have misunderstood something, but there are things that are just written in there that we now understand to be wrong?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is that we have to be very careful about equating all the religious texts. And I do actually think that you are careful about that, but that's something we can have a discussion about a little bit later.
I agree with you there.
So because, for a lot of my life, I would say, more interested in the universal truths expressed in religious belief across different cultures. But I've become more and more aware of the important distinctions between the religious cultures, maybe in the last 10 years. So it isn't clear to me that you can just throw all religious dicta in the same bucket. And there's complex reasons for that. So, and one question, which you kind of sent at Sam already, is, do you see a hierarchy of unacceptability between different religious doctrines? And I would say you acted, okay, fine. So, okay, now, but here's an interesting issue. And I think we're starting to zero in on, we've covered what we agree on, a lot of it, but there's another thing.
Answer Brett's question, because I think it was a good one.
Sorry, I answered the first half of it, but the second part is, I think that this is where I'm going to sound like a postmodernist, which I really hate. I would say, sentence by sentence, yes, you're correct. Paragraph by paragraph, perhaps. But here's the problem with complicated texts, especially ones that actually constitute narratives. So imagine this. So imagine you're at a movie, and it's a movie with a twist at the end. And so the entire movie is set up to make you think one particular way and to have one set of experiences. But when you put the twist in at the end, it changes the entire structure. And so this is one of the complex problems that actually led to the rise of postmodern interpretations of literature, which is that if you take a complex narrative, there's a very large number of ways of interpreting it, and it isn't self-evident which of those are canonically correct. And we can deal with that horrible issue later, but it's a good objection, and it's true. And what it does is it makes these sorts of things quite complicated, because in the Bible is a series of books, and they had influence on one another, and they were sequenced with a very complex editorial process, and there's actually a developmental narrative that links all the chapters together. And what that means, this is, at least I'm going to speak from the perspective, or in terms of analysis of the Christian Bible, what it means is that you have to read the beginning as if it's also influenced by the end, which is what, by the way, and in case you think that I'm weaseling around here, and I'm not, is that's exactly what you do every time you read any story, any work of fiction. You say, well, you're not claiming that the Bible is a work of fiction. It's like, that's just a cheap objection. That's not my point. My point is that it's a narrative. And everything in a narrative is conditioned by all the rest of the things in the narrative. And it's well known, like if you're a screenwriter, for example, there's an old dictum, I don't remember who generated it, it was one of the great Russians, that if there's a rifle lying on a table in the first scene, that it better be used by the end of the second scene, or it shouldn't have been there at all. So there's this coherence.
I'm looking for the rifle in your answer to this question, though,
yeah,
because I want it to be used.
My point is that it isn't reasonable to take a single sentence out of a coherent narrative and say that stands on its own, or it's rarely reasonable, because you have to interpret the word in the sentence and the sentence in the paragraph and the paragraph in the chapter and the chapter in the context of the entire book. You have to do that. Now, you could object, and reasonably so, that there are some sentences that are so blatant that you can't use context to paraphrase them, let's say. But I think you also have to give the devil its due. The Christian Bible is a developmental narrative, and the beginning has to be read in light of the end. And is it a fact?
Okay, well,
So what does that do to Moses' laws of war? This is not a narrative. This is instructions about what to do when you invade a foreign land. If you intend to take over that land, you kill everybody. Right? There are other rules in there about killing husbands and taking the wives.
Yeah,
for
the Old
yourself.
Testament's a brutal document.
Absolutely brutal. And so my point would be, I don't know that reading that portion in light of the end, even if you call the end the New Testament, I don't know that it changes Moses' laws of war and their acceptability in
Well,
any modern
hypothetically, if you
context.
take the New Testament seriously, it does, because it's a document that supersedes it. And I think there's actually technical reasons
but
why
it doesn't
supersedes
supersede it on every point. I mean, this is the problem. Slavery is a very straightforward case because clearly the Bible thumpers of the South who were defending slavery with reference to the text felt they were on firm ground. And I would invite anyone to read what the New Testament and the Old Testament say about slavery to see that they were on fairly firm ground, that the balance of the honest reading was on the side of clearly we can keep slaves, right? Jesus never envisioned a world without slavery, and he admonished slaves to serve their masters well and to serve their Christian masters especially well.
The English Protestants wouldn't have agreed with that because, like I said, they were at the forefront of the fight against slavery.
Okay,
so
but
I think
they
there was
were
a
clearly
range
influenced by something outside the text, and this is, again, you're making this harder than it is, and my concern is why. Right?
Well, I don't think I am, Sam, because I think that the fundamental message in the New Testament, for example, is that
so then you acknowledge that the Old Testament. So Jews are in possession of a book that has some diabolical passages that would be better left out. You're not going to offend me. I'm Jewish.
It's not like look in the Old Testament itself, in the Jewish Bible. There's also the seeds of the same tension. So, for example, there's a tension, and this should be a tension that's of interest to you because you've stated quite clearly in your book, in the moral landscape, that you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater with regards at least to religious phenomenology. You said that, for example, I still consider the world's religions to be mere intellectual ruins maintained at enormous economic and social cost, but now I understood that important psychological truths could be found in the rubble. Well, I'm trying to find the important psychological truths in the rubble.